Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time Winfield Scott Hancock fought the Battle of First Deep Bottom. Now, the second part to that operation gets executed, the explosion of the mine dug to the Confederate trenches, and the attack that followed, known as the Crater. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Following the unsuccessful attempt by Winfield Scott Hancock and Philip Sheridan to cut the railroad north of Richmond that resulted in the Battle of First Deep Bottom, the second part of that operation was still set to take place, the explosion of the mine dug by the 9th Corps troops. Army Commander George Meade ordered the mine exploded at 3:30 a.m. on July 30th. 9th Corps Commander Ambrose Burnside wanted to use his division of African American troops to spearhead the attack that took place following the explosion. For pretty much all of the Overland Campaign, Burnside's division of black soldiers under Edward Ferrero were held back, guarding wagon trains or digging earthworks for other corps. Since they had not endured the brutal attacks from the Wilderness to Cold Harbor, their ranks were fuller than the rest of the divisions of his corps, so he chose them to make the attack once the black powder explosion broke the Confederate line. For 2 weeks, while Pennsylvania miners turned soldiers dug the tunnel underneath the Confederates, Ferrero trained his troops in what would be expected of them in that attack. During the advance, some of the regiments would break off and advance along the flank as guards to widen the breach and push back any Confederates in their way. When Burnside informed Meade that he had chosen Ferrero's black troops as the assault force, Meade balked at the thought, saying that he couldn't send those inexperienced troops into battle. Plus, he didn't want the flanking maneuver performed, deciding that the assault column needed to make a direct assault. Burnside had more faith in the African American soldiers than the army commander, but now Burnside would need to choose another attacking force. He had 3 other divisions to choose from. James Ledley's division was the freshest, not having been on the front lines in a couple of weeks, but his most dependable divisions were more shot up from the fighting across Virginia. After consulting with his generals, they couldn't decide who would lead the assault. Burnside put their 3 names in a hat, probably his own, and drew out a name. Ledley's name was on it. His division would lead the attack with the other divisions giving support. Meade ordered the 18th Corps and the 5th Corps to support Burnside's attack. Not only that, but the Chief of Artillery for the Army of the Potomac, Henry Hunt, assembled 110 cannons and 54 mortars to blast away at the Confederates after the detonation of the mine. Meade and General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant watched in the direction they knew the mine would explode, but by 4 a.m. nothing had happened. Grant rode to Meade's headquarters and inquired as to the delay. Meade wired Burnside, but Burnside wasn't sure about the delay either, but all suspected it had something to do with the fuses. No one's nervous anxiety exceeded that of Colonel Henry Pleasants. He, perched on a nearby earthwork, watch in hand, like a maniac, waiting for the culmination of more than a month of his labor. Sergeant Harry Reese and Lieutenant Jacob Doughty suspected that the problem resided at a place where the fuses had been spliced and presented this theory to Pleasants. The colonel considered this likely, but hesitated to allow his subordinates to re-enter the shaft until he could be reasonably certain that the charge would not blow. That time came at 4:15 a.m. The 2 intrepid volunteers plunged into the shaft and discovered that near the tamping at about the halfway point of the fuse trail, where splices connected 2 links, the fire had, indeed, sputtered out. Reese may have rushed out of the mine to retrieve a knife to repair the damage, and then returned to relight the fuse, scrambling back out again with no little haste. At 4:44 a.m., the Confederate position erupted, mesmerizing the Union and rebel soldiers alike. For those caught up in the explosion, a chaotic upheaval of human flesh and debris was sent skyward. One Confederate described it as, "The ground reeled and throbbed beneath our feet as the volcano burst from the bowels of the earth, hurling upward men, cannon, logs, and vast boulders, obscuring the light of day. The fiends had launched their mine." A soldier caught in the explosion remembered, "God only knows how high it sent me. I spread my wings to see if I could fly, but the first thing I knowed, I was lying on top of the works." Another wrote, "The astonishing effect of the explosion bursting like a volcano at the feet of the men and upheaving an immense column of more than 100,000 cubic feet of earth fell around in heavy masses, wounding, crushing, or burying everything in its path. Around 352 Confederates fell victim to the blast. The destruction to the Confederate line wasn't complete. That was just the beginning. Within seconds of the explosion, the 164 artillery pieces placed by Henry Hunt and others erupted from the Union side, sending shot and shell into the chaotic scene. One Virginia soldier described the scene in eloquent language. The grand chorus of artillery which immediately succeeded the explosion was such a roar as would fitly herald the introduction of fiends from the lower regions, and was played by an orchestra that combined its awful diapason, all the notes from the shrill treble of the whistle and shell to the heavy bass of the Dahlgren or mortar. Within minutes of the explosion, probably just enough time for the smoke and the dust to settle so that some visibility could be gained, Ledley's division stepped off for the exposed Confederate position. They were supposed to move through the rebel line and take a rise just beyond it. That would give the Federal soldiers the high ground above the city of Petersburg. Instead, Ledley's men aimed for the crater and stayed there, attempting to extricate buried rebels that were still alive and take them as prisoners, and getting into a safe position to throw back a Confederate counterstrike that they expected. Griffin's brigade of Potter's division moved forward next, but try as Griffin might, the brigade seemed drawn to the crater instead of expanding the breach to the right. Hartramp's brigade of Wilcox's division was the next unit to move forward out of the trenches and through the no-man's land between the opposing entrenchments. But just like the other brigades, they gravitated toward the crater, only expanding the Union hold about 90 feet. A traffic jam emerged as the crater began to fill with a mass of humanity. Some of Hartramp's men began to unearth cannons, buried by the explosion, but they did little else with the area becoming filled with troops unwilling or unable to go further. Wilcox moved his command post within 70 yards of the crater and issued orders for Hartranft to move forward no matter what Ledley's division was doing. Hartranft, to protect his flank, attempted to guard his and the Corps' left flank by sending the 27th Michigan south. He was hoping to form a strong defensive line that ran from Confederate works on the left to the Jerusalem Plank Road on the right, but Confederate musketry drove the Wolverines away from the position, and the rest of Hartramp's brigade moved closer and into the crater. A lieutenant wrote, "It was as utterly impracticable to reform a brigade in that crater as it would be to marshal bees into line after upsetting their hive." One major reason for all the problems facing the 9th Corps in that early morning was that no officer above a brigade commander was at the front. Wilcox was 70 yards behind, but others were even further, like Ledley, who went to a bomb-proof 50 yards behind the Union entrenchments, not knowing what was happening with his division. Burnside remained within view of the attack near a grouping of 14 artillery pieces. Meade didn't get close, relying on his communication with Burnside to keep him informed of the situation. Meade also reached out to Winfield Scott Hancock and Gouverneur K. Warren to help with their corps. To keep in contact with his divisions, Burnside assigned a staff officer with each of his divisions. When the staff officer connected to Ledley's division went to Burnside, he didn't know that Burnside had moved his headquarters to the field, and instead went to Burnside's formal headquarters, where Meade had ventured. Meade got the message that Ledley's division was floundering and not moving forward, which angered the army commander. Burnside in his reports had portrayed the attacks as somewhat successful, but this report from the front contradicted Burnside's messages. He ordered Burnside to push his corps toward Cemetery Hill in the rear of the Confederate entrenchments. Then he wired Warren and Hancock, telling them to look for an opportunity and a weakness in the enemy line, telling them that if Burnside's attack became successful, the enemy would have no choice but to break in their front from the assault. However, as one historian put it, apparently it did not occur to Meade to consider the situation in reverse. Rather than waiting for Burnside's success to trigger supporting attacks on his flanks, might not such attacks have weakened the resistance at the salient and facilitate a favorable outcome at the crater? A heated exchange resulted between Burnside and Meade. Burnside wired Meade, "I am doing all in my power to push the troops forward, and if possible, we will carry the crest. It is hard work, but we hope to accomplish it. I am fully alive to the importance of it." Meade replied, "What do you mean by hard work to take the crest? I understand not a man has advanced beyond the enemy's line, which you occupied immediately after exploding the mine. Do you mean to say your officers and men will not obey your orders to advance? If not, what is the obstacle? I wish to know the truth and desire an immediate answer." Burnside in turn stated, "I have never in any report said anything different from what I conceive to be the truth. Were it not insubordinate, I would say that the latter remark of your note was unofficerlike and ungentlemanly." The rift between the two officers widened with the chaos of the crater. The Confederates weren't entirely thrown into confusion. Undoubtedly, the explosion destroyed Pegram's battery, and confusion reigned around the crater for a while, exacerbated by the influx of Burnside's Ninth Corps capturing the crater and some of the works. Quickly, troops from around the Petersburg defenses came to the scene to throw back the Federals.